The operator has right at the top of the hour.
Throughout our history, the U.S. Census Bureau has enhanced and strengthened how we protect people's privacy when they respond to surveys and censuses. By law, we must ensure that we don't release information that could identify you in the statistics we publish, like your name, address, sex, age, race, ethnicity, or household composition. But today's computers have become so powerful that it is easier than ever to take the information we do release and pair it with information gathered from other sources, like the commercial data brokers who collect and sell information based on things like our purchases and financial transactions. Once those data sets are matched, it's easy to identify people within a set of data, or within a city block, small town, or rural area. When we simulated this kind of attack on 2010 census data, we found that 52 million people could be identified that way. And this is the best case scenario, using a small number of outside data sources from the time of the 2010 census. A worst case scenario puts the number much higher, at 179 million re-identified, because the quality of these outside data sources is much stronger a decade later. There is good news though. The Census Bureau is modernizing privacy protections so we can defend against these new threats, not just now, but into the future. So how are we doing it? We're using a mathematical framework called Differential Privacy to disguise personal information in the data we publish. Just as with protections we've used in the past, it works by adding just a little bit of noise or fuzziness to the data, but in a much more precise way. When we inject statistical noise, it blurs the detail on individuals. Up close, the details are fuzzy and difficult to piece together. But when you pull back, the details add together and make a sharper picture. What's new is that with differential privacy, we can carefully calibrate how much noise to add so that the results strike a better balance between privacy and precision. We've tested this approach on other sets of data, including 2010 census results, to make sure it works. And we've worked closely with data users and other statisticians to fine-tune the system so it meets their critical data needs. As the Census Bureau continues to release 2020 census statistics, differential privacy means we can publish accurate and usable data, all while protecting your privacy.
Hello, I'm James Whitehorn, Chief of the Redistricting and Voting Rights Data Office at the U.S. Census Bureau.
And I'm Nicholas Jones, Senior Advisor on Race, Ethnicity, Research, and Outreach at the U.S. Census Bureau.
And we're here to answer some of the most common questions about the next 2020 census data release.
These data are used for redistricting.
What is redistricting?
Redistricting is the process in which all 50 states, the District of Columbia, and Puerto Rico redraw the boundaries of congressional, state, legislative, and many other types of districts. Most use census data to do this. What statistics are included in the redistricting data?
The redistricting data provide population counts as well as demographic characteristics of ethnicity, race, and voting age at all levels of geography, down to the block level. While the primary purpose of these data is for states to redraw their districts, these statistics will also tell us how many people live in each county, in each city, and in each block. We'll also have the first 2020 census national and local statistics on things like voting age population, race, Hispanic origin, whether homes are occupied or vacant, and how many people are living in group quarters. This information will provide a more detailed demographic portrait of our nation's population for all communities all across the United States. When are you releasing the results?
In order to provide these critical data to all 50 states, the District of Columbia, and Puerto Rico as soon as possible, we're providing data in 2 releases. It's the same data, just in different formats. The first release will be in August. We'll provide data in what we call a legacy format, the method we've used for decades. This is meant for experienced data users who are familiar with working with large data sets. We'll post these large files on our FTP site. That format should work for most states to start their redistricting efforts. And for other data users who are familiar with working with databases to make it easier for everyone else, we'll also have additional materials to help you pull out the highlights for the nation and for your state. Then in September, we'll release the exact same data, but in far more user-friendly formats that people are familiar with and that allow for easier searching. We'll officially send the redistricting data via DVDs and flash drives to state officials, with toolkits and software that help them to easily view and extract the data they need. At the same time, data will also be made available on data.census.gov, our publicly available data search engine. Why does it take so much time for the Census Bureau to release the redistricting information?
We have to take the time to get it right. The 2020 census showed that our nation's population has increased to more than 330 million people since the 2010 census. Because of the sheer volume and complexity of data we need to provide, it takes time for us to calculate, review, and tabulate the information. So it is released a few months after the apportionment counts, which tell us only how many people live in the country in total and how many people live in each state. In addition to crunching the numbers, we also have to protect everyone's information and ensure individuals can't be identified. We'll have more detailed demographic statistics from the 2020 census available after the redistricting data are released.
Good afternoon. On behalf of the U.S. Census Bureau, welcome to our briefing and thank you for joining us. Today we will release the redistricting data from the 2020 census to the states. I am Michael Cook, Chief of the Public Information Office, and I will serve as moderator for today's program. Today, you will hear from Acting Director Dr. Ron Jarman, Chief of the Redistricting and Voting Rights Data Office, James Whitehorn, Senior Demographer in our Population Division, Mark Perry, and the Census Bureau's Race and Ethnicity Research and Outreach Director, Nicholas Jones. We will now begin with our first speaker, James Whitehorn. James?
Thank you, Michael. Hello, everyone. I'm James Whitehorn, Chief of the Census Redistricting and Voting Rights Data Office. Today, we have the special task of publishing the 2020 Census PL 94-171 Redistricting Summary File data that states may choose to use in redrawing their state legislative and congressional districts. These data provide the first look at the demographic characteristics of the nation by state, county, city, down to the individual census block, and show how our population has changed since the 2010 census. Today's release includes statistics on race and ethnicity, voting age population, occupied and vacant housing units, and people living in group quarters like nursing homes, prisons, military barracks, and college dormitories. We are releasing today's redistricting data on our Public File Transfer Protocol, or FTP site. Today's data release is the same format we've used since the 2000 census. For data users, this format requires some additional software and work to extract the data. We are providing a number of supporting materials on our Redistricting Data Program webpage to help users work with this format of data. To help the public more easily explore the numbers, we're also providing an analysis and highlights of what we're seeing in the data, along with data visualization tools and a 2020 census data map. We hope you go to census.gov to further explore the data for your community. By September of this year, we'll release the data in an easier-to-use format for all data users through our data.census.gov platform. Additionally, we will provide designated state officials a toolkit in the form of DVDs and flash drives to help them more easily review and extract the data. Thank you, and now I'd like to pass it over to Dr. Ron Jarman.
Thanks, James. Hello, everyone. I'm Ron Jarman, Acting Director at the U.S. Census Bureau. It is my honor to represent all the hard-working staff at the Census Bureau who spent countless hours working to count everyone in the 2020 census. In April, we released the apportionment results from the 2020 census, which showed that the total population in the U.S. was 331.4 million, and determined each state's share of the 435 seats in the U.S. House of Representatives. Since then, we've had teams working nonstop on the next set of 2020 census data, the redistricting data. We officially call this release the 2020 Census Redistricting Data PL 94-171 Summary File. These data play an important role in our democracy and also begin to illuminate how the local and demographic makeup of our nation has changed over the last decade. As we discussed before, the COVID-19 pandemic significantly delayed our schedule for collecting and processing the data for the 2020 census. We have understood the urgency to provide these redistricting data to the states, some of which have tight deadlines. And so, to provide some relief and to provide these critical data to all 50 states, the District of Columbia, and Puerto Rico as soon as possible, we're providing the exact same data in 2 releases. The first release is happening today, but there will be a second release in September that will be easier to access and to use. We will continue to release 2020 census data in 2022 and beyond. I'd like to say a few words about data quality, something which we know there is keen interest given the challenges presented in 2020. We have produced the reliable and usable statistics that we and the public expect. While no census is perfect, we are confident that today's redistricting results meet our high data quality standards. It is too early to speculate on undercounts or overcounts for any specific demographic group, and we look forward to the release of the post-enumeration survey results in 2022, which will provide information on coverage of demographic groups in the 2020 census. Overall, the 2020 census results for Hispanic origin, age 18 and over, housing units, and group quarters are in line with our population benchmarks. Soon, we will release additional operational quality metrics to give further insight into how we collected 2020 census responses and what that might mean for the quality of the data. Throughout data processing, we've been comparing the counts to benchmarks as part of our quality checks on the data, and we have conducted one of the most comprehensive reviews in recent census history. The data we are releasing today meet our high data quality standards. Finally, I'd like to take a moment to discuss the confidentiality of our statistics. When we collected data for the 2020 census from households across the nation, we assured them that their responses would be kept confidential as required by law. Because the redistricting data have rich demographic characteristics available for very small areas, such as census blocks, it is essential that we take steps to protect the confidentiality of individuals in our published statistics. The redistricting data summary files will be the first 2020 census data protected using differential privacy. This sophisticated framework is the foundation of our disclosure avoidance system and protects individual information while letting us share important statistics about communities. We've used this method successfully in several other census data products. Just as with protections we used in the past, differential privacy protects personal information by adding noise or fuzziness to the data. This noise is carefully calibrated following numerous consultations with stakeholders to protect the data at the most granular level, but ensure accuracy across larger geographies and groups. Results from the 2020 census will be used for the next 10 years to shape the future of our country. Local leaders can use this data to make decisions such as where to build roads and hospitals and how to help our nation recover from the pandemic. These results will also help inform how hundreds of billions of dollars in federal funds will be distributed each year nationwide. The data we are releasing today meet our high data quality standards, and I am proud to present them to the American public. I will now turn it over to Mark Perry, Senior Demographer in our Population Division, to begin announcing some of the results of the redistricting data. Thank you.
Thanks, Ron. Good afternoon. I'm Mark Perry, a Senior Demographer in the Population Division at the Census Bureau. I'll be reviewing some of the broader findings for the total population this decade, the distribution of the population, as well as patterns of population increase and decrease between 2010 and 2020 from the national level to states, counties, metropolitan and micropolitan areas, and for the largest cities. As we saw with the release of the first 2020 census data several months ago, the total population of the United States on April 1, 2020 was 331.4 million, an increase of 22.7 million from 2010. This graph shows population change for the United States by decade for the past century. The bars show the numeric change in population by decade. The black line shows the percentage change by decade. Since the 1950s, percentage increases have generally been declining each decade. This past decade's 7.4% increase was lower than the previous decade's 9.7% increase and was, in fact, the second lowest percent increase ever. Only the 1930s had slower growth. This slowdown in growth is evident if you look at population change at the state level for the past 3 decades. This slide and the next 2 slides will show how state populations have changed for the past 3 decades. Here we see a map of population change for the states, the District of Columbia, and Puerto Rico for the decade 1990 to 2000. The 4 census regions are also outlined on the map. Those areas in the darkest shade had growth of 10% or more for the decade. Those in the lightest shade had growth of 0 to 4.9%. Areas shaded in orange had population decline. The country grew by a relatively robust 13.2% in the 1990s. All 50 states increased in population that decade, as did Puerto Rico. Only the District of Columbia lost population during the 1990s. States growing by 10% or more that decade were almost all in the South or West. Here we see the equivalent map for 2000 to 2010 with the same categories. From 2000 to 2010, the fastest growing states were located in either the West or the South. During this decade, 49 states and the District of Columbia grew, with Michigan and Puerto Rico declining in population. We see fewer states growing by 10% or more, and no states in the Northeast or Midwest growing that rapidly. We also see more states in the 0 to 4.9% category. And finally, here is the map for 2010 to 2020. The slowdown in population growth this past decade is evident. There are fewer states in the highest growth category, more states growing slowly, and 3 states, West Virginia, Mississippi, and Illinois, along with Puerto Rico, declined in population. Most states in the West continue to be in the fastest growth category, but this is no longer true in the South. In that region, only 5 states and the District of Columbia were in the fastest growing category, whereas 6 states in the South had moderate growth, 3 were in the slowest growth, and 2 had population decline. In all 3 decades, the fastest growing states have tended to be in the South or West, with generally slower growth for states in the Northeast and Midwest. A notable exception is North Dakota this past decade, which was up 15.8% and one of the fastest growing states. I'll replay the 3 decades again so that you can see the changes over time. Now let's look at counties. We'll start with this map showing population density for counties in the 2020 census. The counties shaded darkest on this map have population densities of 1,000 or more people per square mile. Those in the lightest shade have densities of less than 50 persons per square mile. This map is a reminder that the U.S. population continues to be very unevenly distributed across the land area, with high population densities in the Northeast corridor from Boston to Washington, D.C., in large metropolitan areas nationwide, and in parts of Puerto Rico. Low population densities are common in the western half of the country and in Alaska. This next set of maps will look at population change by decade for counties in the United States and Puerto Rico. With the redistricting data released today, we see that the slowdown in growth over the past 3 decades is even more pronounced at the county level than for states. I'll show maps for the last 3 decades, all with the same classes, so you can easily see how patterns have changed over time. This first map shows percent change in population between 1990 and 2000 for counties. Those counties shaded in dark green grew by 20% or more, which was well above the 13.2% increase nationally for that decade. Those counties shaded orange, on the other hand, had population decline. In the 1990s, most counties had population growth, and many were in the 20% or more category. There were a number of counties that lost population that decade. Most counties declining in population were located in the Great Plains region of the country's midsection, along with parts of Appalachia, interior parts of the Northeast, and the Mississippi Delta. Moving ahead to the 2000 to 2010 decade, population decline, those counties shaded in orange, became somewhat more extensive. And whereas growth in the 1990s was often widespread across regions, in the 2000 to 2010 decade, we start to see growth mainly occurring in metro areas. Most of the counties growing by 20% or more that decade were in the South or West, and often were the outer counties of moderately or fast-growing metropolitan areas such as Atlanta, Dallas-Fort Worth, or Minneapolis-St. Paul. We now turn to the 2010 to 2020 decade. Population decline is even more widespread this decade, with 52% of all counties having smaller populations in 2020 than in 2010. Metro areas are even more prominent this decade as the locations of population growth amidst otherwise widespread population decline. Texas is a good example of this, where parts of the Houston, San Antonio, Austin, Dallas-Fort Worth, Midland, and Odessa metro areas had population growth, whereas many of the state's other counties had population declines. Rapid growth also occurred in parts of western North Dakota. McKenzie County, North Dakota, was the country's fastest growing county this decade, increasing a whopping 131% between 2010 and 2020. Nearby Williams County, North Dakota, grew by 83%. I'll replay the 3 decades again so that you can see the changes over time. When we look more closely at the patterns of population increase and decrease for counties this past decade, we see a strong relationship to population size, with small counties tending to lose population and more populous counties tending to gain people. This bar chart shows it in more detail. The graphic shows percent change in population this past decade by county population size in 2010. The 4 smallest size categories all experienced population decline this decade. Counties with populations under 1,000 in 2010, for example, lost 4.4% of their population during the decade. Counties with 1 to 5,000 people, 5 to 10,000 people, and 10 to 50,000 people also lost people this decade on average. Only 2 categories of counties showed growth. Counties with between 50 and 100,000 people grew by 4.1%, while counties with 100,000 or more people grew by 9.1%. Now let's look at population change over time for metropolitan areas. Metro areas are collections of one or more counties that have an urban core of at least 50,000 people and adjacent territory with close economic and social ties to that core. During the 1990s, some of the fastest growing metro areas were in the South and the interior West, while some metro areas in upstate New York, western Pennsylvania, and parts of the Midwest lost population. And here we see the pattern for 2000 to 2010. Compared to the prior decade, fewer metro areas grew by 20% or more, and more metro areas declined in population. Most metro areas in Puerto Rico lost population that decade. And here's the map for 2010 to 2020. We see even fewer metro areas with growth of 20% or more, and more metro areas declining in population. Indeed, metro areas with population decline are now found in all 4 regions, and many states have metro areas with population gains, as well as those with population declines. All of the metro and micro areas in Puerto Rico lost population this decade. The Villages, Florida, was the country's fastest growing metro area this decade, up 39% from 2010. I'll replay the 3 decades again so you can see the changes over time. As a result of the patterns of population change seen in the prior maps, the country's population is increasingly metropolitan. This graphic shows the shares of the U.S. population in core-based statistical areas, the collective term for metro and micro areas, as well as outside CBSA, that is, population not in a metro or micro area. In 2000, 84.3% of the U.S. population was in a metro area. That's the light green section of the graphic on the left. By 2020, the proportion of the U.S. population in metro areas increased to 86.3%, while it decreased in both micro areas and in areas outside of metro and micro areas. Finally, let's look briefly at some 2020 census results for cities. This table shows the 10 largest cities in 2020 and their populations and population change for the past 2 decades. The 10 largest cities all grew this past decade, and 8 of the 10 grew at a faster rate this decade compared to the last. The fastest growing of these large cities was Phoenix, whose population increased by 11.2% this decade. The 10 largest cities in 2020 are the same group as in 2010, but the rankings changed slightly. Phoenix moved up from 6th to 5th largest city and traded spots with Philadelphia, which moved down from 5th to 6th. For the first time ever in a decennial census, all 10 of the largest cities in the United States now have more than 1 million people. This map shows the 14 cities with population gains of 100,000 or more this decade. 12 were located in the South or West, with 1 each in the Northeast and Midwest. The cities with the largest population gains this decade were New York, up more than 600,000, and Houston, up just over 200,000. This map shows the 10 fastest growing cities in percentage terms this decade, among those that had at least 50,000 people in 2010. The map shows those 10 fastest growing cities as red dots, and it labels their nearest large city as a green dot. As you can see, these fast growing cities are generally suburbs of nearby larger cities. So in other words, Frisco and McKinney, Texas are both fast-growing cities near Dallas, and Kent, Washington is a fast-growing suburb of Seattle. All 10 of these cities grew by at least 44%, and the fastest-growing one, Buckeye, Arizona, a western suburb of Phoenix, was up nearly 80% this decade to reach over 91,000 in population. In summary, U.S. population growth slowed this decade. Only the 1930s had slower growth. Fewer states, metro areas, and counties had rapid population growth this decade. Population decline was widespread this decade. Most counties lost population between 2010 and 2020. On average, smaller counties tended to lose population, and more populous counties tended to grow. Population growth this decade was almost entirely in metro areas. Metro areas grew by 8.7%, and micro areas grew by 0.8%. Population in territory not in a metro or micro area declined by 2.8%. All 10 of the country's most populous cities grew this decade. I'll now turn it over to my colleague Nicholas Jones, who will discuss some of the broader 2020 census findings for race and ethnicity.
Thank you, Mark. That was really great information about how areas across the nation are changing. Good afternoon. I'm Nicholas Jones, the Director of Race, Ethnicity Research and Outreach for the Census Bureau's Population Division. I'm honored to be here and excited to share highlights on 2020 census statistics for race and ethnicity. Mark and I would both like to thank all of the dedicated census staff and especially our colleagues in Population Division for the months and months of work undertaken during the pandemic to process, code, review, and analyze the 2020 data. Census Bureau experts have worked tirelessly to prepare this new information for the American public. You entrusted us with this data, and it is our duty to return it back to you, the people of the United States. Today's release of 2020 census data provide a new snapshot of the racial and ethnic composition and the racial and ethnic diversity of our nation. To help state officials, researchers, media, and the public examine the redistricting statistics for your state and county, as well as other areas across the country, we just released 2 America Counts stories on our website. Together, the stories provide a new snapshot of our nation's population and how interconnected we are. It's important to frame the 2020 census data historically, as the U.S. Census Bureau has collected data on race since the first census in 1790 and data on Hispanic or Latino origin since the 1970 census. How the concepts of race and ethnicity are measured and how the statistics are collected and coded has changed every decade. These changes reflected social, political, and economic factors throughout our nation's history. You can explore the new data viz on our website, census.gov. The 2020 census data enable us to understand how the racial and ethnic composition and the racial and ethnic diversity of the United States population looked in 2020. Before we present the results, it's important to note that the U.S. Census Bureau collects race and ethnicity data in accordance with the 1997 standards for maintaining, collecting, and presenting federal data on race and ethnicity, directed by the U.S. Office of Management and Budget, or OMB. Therefore, the designs of the 2020 census questions on Hispanic origin and race are similar to the designs used in the 2000 census and the 2010 census. While the Census Bureau tested an alternative question design in 2015, we must ultimately follow the 1997 OMB standards and use 2 separate questions to collect data on race and on ethnicity. Our testing, however, did show that we could make improvements to the 2020 census race and ethnicity questions within the OMB guidelines. Building on our extensive research and outreach last decade, we made several improvements to the questions for 2020. I encourage you to check out our recent webinar and blog to learn more. We improved the ways we process the data and code the responses to these questions. This work began in 2015 with our research and testing centered on findings from the 2015 National Content Test, and the designs were implemented in the 2018 census test. The improvements and changes enable a more thorough and accurate depiction of how people self-identify, yielding a more accurate portrait of how people report their Hispanic origin and their race within the context of a 2-question format. These changes reveal that the U.S. population is much more multiracial and more racially and ethnically diverse than what we measured in the past. We are confident that differences in the overall racial distributions are largely due to improvements in the design of the 2 separate questions for race data collection and processing, as well as some demographic changes over the past 10 years. We are also confident, as shown in our research over the past decade, that using a single combined question for race and ethnicity in the decennial census would ultimately yield an even more accurate portrait of how the U.S. population self-identifies, especially for people who self-identify as multiracial or multi-ethnic. The 2020 census illuminates the racial and ethnic composition of the United States. The first component of this composition, for ethnicity statistics, comes from the question on Hispanic or Latino origin. From these data, we know that the Hispanic or Latino population numbered 62.1 million in 2020. The second component of this composition, for racial statistics, comes from a separate question on race. To frame the discussion of racial composition, we use the concepts of race alone, race in combination, and race alone or in combination. These concepts have been in place since the 2000 census, and the three concepts are central to understanding our country's changing demographics. Today's release of 2020 Census Statistics provides a new snapshot of the racial and ethnic composition of the country. The white population remains the largest race or ethnicity group in the United States, with 204.3 million people identifying as white alone and 235.4 million people identifying as white alone or in combination with another race group. The two or more races population, also referred to as the multiracial population, was measured at 33.8 million people in 2020. The sum of the race alone or in combination population at 49.9 million surpassed the Black or African American population, which was 46.9 million, as the second largest race alone or in combination group. The next largest racial populations were the Asian alone or in combination group with 24 million people, the American Indian and Alaska Native alone or in combination group with 9.7 million people, and the Native Hawaiian and other Pacific Islander alone or in combination group with 1.6 million people. In the 2020 census, for all race groups, their in-combination multiracial populations accounted for most of the overall changes in each racial category. Although the white alone population decreased by 8.6% since 2010, the white in-combination population saw a 316% change during the same period. While the Black or African American alone population grew 5.6% since 2010, the Black or African American in combination population grew 88.7%. Over the past 10 years, the American Indian and Alaska Native in combination population increased by 160%. The Asian alone population grew by 35.5% between 2010 and 2020. In comparison, the Asian in combination population grew 55.5% since 2010. The Native Hawaiian and other Pacific Islander alone population grew by 27.8% between 2010 and 2020. In comparison, the Native Hawaiian and other Pacific Islander in combination population grew faster at 30.8% since 2010. The sum of the race in combination population changed 733% since 2010. It is important to note that these comparisons between the 2020 census and 2010 census race data should be made with caution, taking into account the improvements we have made to the Hispanic origin and race questions, data processing, and the ways we code what people tell us. Accordingly, data from the 2020 census showed different but reasonable and expected distributions from the 2010 census for the white alone population, the sum of the race alone or in combination population, and the multiracial population, especially for people who self-identify as both white and some other race. The largest multiracial combinations in 2020 were white and some other race at 19.3 million, white and American Indian and Alaska Native with 4 million, white and Black or African American at 3.1 million, white and Asian at 2.7 million, and Black or African American and some other race with 1 million. Another way to examine data on race and ethnicity is to cross-tabulate Hispanic or Latino origin by race. This was done for Census 2000 and the 2010 census, as well as the 2020 census redistricting tables. Table P2 provides cross-tabulated Hispanic origin by race statistics. To illustrate the results from the cross-tabulation of Hispanic origin by race data, this graphic compares percent change in racial identification among the Hispanic or Latino population, shown on the left, and the percent change among non-Hispanics on the right. The number of people of Hispanic or Latino origin who identified as white alone decreased by 52.9%, down from 26.7 million to 12.6 million over the 10-year period. Between 2010 and 2020, the number of people of Hispanic or Latino origin reporting more than one race increased from 3 million, 6%, to 20.3 million, 32.7%, a 567% change. We describe the results in our America Counts story with an overview of race and ethnicity in the United States. Again, these results are not surprising as they align with our expert research and corresponding findings this past decade about the impacts of the decennial census question format on race and ethnicity reporting. These improvements more accurately illustrate the richness and complexity of how people self-identify their race and ethnicity in response to two separate questions within the current OMB standards. In a companion America Counts story that we released today, we illustrate how the 2020 census results allow us to measure the nation's racial and ethnic diversity and how it varies at different geographic levels. We explore multiple measures of racial and ethnic diversity. For these measures, we cross-tabulate the race and Hispanic origin statistics as data users often do, such as with the 2020 census redistricting tables. Here we see results that are not as impacted by the race reporting patterns of Hispanic or Latino respondents. Thus, we are confident that the changes we are seeing from 2010 to 2020 in the diversity measures, which calculate mutually exclusive Hispanic origin by race groups, likely reflect actual demographic changes in the population over the past 10 years, as well as improvements to the question designs, data processing, and coding. Another way to understand the results from the 2020 census is to see how all racial and ethnic groups are distributed across the country to inform our understanding of diversity. Some people have different perceptions of what it means for a population to be diverse. Our definition for diversity refers to the representation and relative size of different racial and ethnic groups within a population. Diversity is maximized when all groups are represented in an area and have equal shares of the population. We are using several approaches to measure the racial and ethnic diversity of the U.S. population. These include the Diversity Index, Prevalence Rankings and the Diffusion Score, and a series of prevalence maps. To help set the stage, we first present a state-level map using data from the 2010 census. The map shows the geographic distribution of the Diversity Index across the country from state to state. The states shown in dark green were more diverse, with a Diversity Index score of 65.0 or more in 2010. States shown in light green were less diverse in 2010. Now we have a map calculating the Diversity Index for the 2020 census. In 2020, at the national level, there was a 61.1% chance that two people chosen at random were from different race and ethnicity groups. This is higher than in 2010, when the Diversity Index was 54.9%. In general, the states with the highest Diversity Index scores in the 2020 census are found in the West, Hawaii, California, and Nevada, in the South, Maryland and Texas, along with the District of Columbia, a state equivalent, and in the Northeast, New York and New Jersey. In 2020, Hawaii had the highest diversity index at 76.0%, followed by California with 69.7% and Nevada with 68.8%. You can see the diversity index for all states using our interactive Tableau data visualization on diversity that we released today on our census.gov website. The next measure of diversity that I will present are prevalence ranking graphs. These graphics show the percentage of the population that falls into the largest race or ethnic group, the second largest race or ethnic group, and the third largest race or ethnic group. In this graphic, the colors of the bars represent the different racial and ethnic groups shown in the legend. Looking at the orange bars in column 1, we see the white alone non-Hispanic population was the most prevalent racial or ethnic group for all states except California, Hawaii, New Mexico, and the District of Columbia, a state equivalent, as well as Puerto Rico. In 2020, the Hispanic or Latino population became the largest racial or ethnic group in California, comprising 39.4% of the total population, up from 37.6% in 2010. In 2020, we also saw shifts in the second most prevalent group for some states. These are shown in the second column of the graphic. In West Virginia, the multiracial non-Hispanic population, 4.0%, became the second most prevalent group. In Wisconsin, the Hispanic or Latino population, 7.6%, became the second most prevalent group. In Texas, the first and second most prevalent group rankings did not change between 2010 and 2020, but the difference in size between the white alone non-Hispanic population and the Hispanic or Latino population shrank to about 0.5%. For the District of Columbia, the difference in the size of the Black or African American alone non-Hispanic population and the white alone non-Hispanic population narrowed dramatically in 2020 to only a 2.9 percentage point difference, down from 15.2 percentage points 10 years ago. As another diversity measure, we also present the Diffusion Score. This Diffusion Score measures the percentage of the population that is not in the first, second, or third largest race and ethnic groups combined. This measure tells us how diverse and unconcentrated the population is relative to the largest groups. 2020 census results show that Hawaii was the state with the highest diffusion score at 21.8%, followed by Alaska at 17.9%, Oklahoma at 17.8%, and Nevada at 16.0%. Another measure that we use is a series of prevalence maps to show geographic distributions and patterns in racial and ethnic diversity across the country. The first map shows the most prevalent race or ethnicity group by county for 2020. In 2020, the white alone non-Hispanic population, shown in orange, was the largest group in about 90% of counties. The Black or African American alone non-Hispanic population, shown in blue, was the largest group in some counties in the South. The Hispanic or Latino population, shown in green, was the most prevalent group in counties in the Southwest and West. In addition, the American Indian and Alaska Native alone non-Hispanic population, shown in purple, was the largest racial or ethnic group in counties in Alaska, the Four Corners region, and the Upper Great Plains. There's more variation in the map for the second most prevalent racial or ethnic group. Here we see racial or ethnic groups are represented in patterns are not as tightly clustered as they were in specific regions in the first most prevalent group. Often these show an inverse relationship to the most prevalent group map. The Hispanic or Latino population, shown in green, was the second most prevalent group and spanned the entire continental United States, with large numbers of counties in every region. The multiracial non-Hispanic population, shown in teal, was the second most prevalent group in many counties throughout the northern part of the country, as well as Alaska and Hawaii. As the country has grown, we've continued to evolve in how we measure the race and ethnicity of the people who live here. The improvements we made to the 2020 census yield a more accurate portrait of how people self-identify in response to two separate questions on Hispanic origin and race. Our analysis of the 2020 census results show that the U.S. population is much more multiracial and more racially and ethnically diverse than what we measured in the past. We encourage you to use our data visualizations to explore the interactive maps and graphics which illustrate the 2020 results in comparison to 2010. These multiple measures of composition and diversity complement the 2020 Census Redistricting data release. These are really amazing resources, and we hope you enjoy exploring them, as the data enable us to explore the richness and complexity of our nation's population in a new light. Thank you for joining us today, and now I'll turn it back over to Michael.
Thank you, speakers. We will now begin taking questions from credentialed media about the information presented today. Members of the media who registered received the phone number via email. When asking a question, remember, please include your name and media affiliation. Operator, can you please provide the instructions for calling in?
Certainly. And once again, if you would like to ask your question by phone, please press *1 on your telephone keypad. One moment for the first question.
And while we wait for those to ready themselves in the queue, just to remind all of our listeners to today's news conference, if you go to census.gov, you can access the information that we have posted on our website live. We have a news release under our America Counts Story Behind the Numbers tab. We have information that we've posted about many of the topics that have been discussed today. So I encourage people to take a look at that information if you haven't seen it already. Operator, are we ready with our first question?
Yes, and the first question comes from Hansi Wang of NPR. Your line is open.
Hi, Hansi.
Thank you. I have two questions for Mr. Nicholas Jones. How concerned is the Census Bureau that now the second largest race group, lone or in combination, is some other race population that the Census Bureau's research in years past has tried to address and tried to provide more specific categories and to provide more specific data for users and the Bureau? And a follow-up question, is the Bureau planning to devote any resources to research how the Bureau's coding changes for write-in answers may affect any historical comparisons of 2020 race ethnicity data with prior race ethnicity data in the decennial census?
Thank you for those two questions, Hansi. I'll go ahead and turn them over to Nick now.
Thank you, Michael, and thanks, Hansi, for your questions. So for your first question, in terms of the separate questions results for 2020, we're not surprised by the findings given the questions are asked in a two separate format. This was shown in our 2015 research in the National Content Test, as well as research over the last several decades about the impacts of separate question formats on race reporting, particularly among the Hispanic population. So one of the ways in which we look at these data are to make the comparisons of the crosstab with race and Hispanic origin, and those results are comparable to what we've seen in the past in terms of trends. We're also encouraged by the ways in which we've been able to make improvements to the 2020 question designs and our data processing and our coding. It's really important to keep in mind that the decennial census has changed every decade since 1790, as you can see in our data visualization that we released. And the results that we see over time, we want to reflect and acknowledge the changes in both our social and political constructs in our nation's history. We'll continue to do more research as we look past 2020 and look towards the future with the 2030 census. Thanks again for your question.
Thanks for that, Nicholas. Operator, do we have our next caller?
The next question is coming from Michael Schneider, Associated Press. Your line is open.
Hi, thank you. My question was for Mr. Jones. I was just hoping you could put into context the fact that the non-Hispanic white population dropped below 60% for the first time. Do you feel that is meaningful in any way? If so, how? And if not, why not?
Good afternoon, Mike, and thanks for your questions. So one of the things that we're really excited about with this new release of the 2020 census data is the ways in which we're looking at the measurements of diversity. And so for 2020, we have several measures that are helping us to understand the complex ways that we can look at our nation's population's diversity, not just looking at a construct that's binary, but also looking at ways that we see how people are interrelated and interconnected across the country. So we're really pleased with the ways that these results can help to illustrate that compared to what we saw 10 years ago.
Thanks for that line of questioning. Operator, do we have a next caller? Next question?
Yes. And the next question has come from Michael McAnony, CQ. Roll call. Your line is open.
Hi, thank you for holding this. I wanted to circle back around on something Hansi asked earlier. Has the agency been able to quantify the impact that the coding changes around race and ethnicity have had on the results?
Thanks for that question, Hansi. Mike McAnally from CQ Roll Call. I'm going to go ahead and toss that over to our population experts to give you some feedback on that.
Thank you, Mike and Michael, for your questions and the follow-up. So one of the ways in which we talk about the results is demonstrated in our America Counts story today on the overview. We do talk about the cautions that should be made when looking at results compared to 2010, given the improvements to the ways that we collect and code and process the data. What's really important to keep in mind is these are improvements to help us see more accuracy in the 2020 census results, given the improvements that we've made over the past 10 years.
Thanks for that, Nicholas. Operator, do we have our next caller?
Yes, and the next question is coming from Steph Knight, Axis. Your line is open.
Hi, I was wondering if you all could provide us with the total number of counties that now have less than 50% of their population made up of non-Hispanic white, kind of looking to see the increase in majority minority counties as of 2020.
Let me take a moment and have our experts take a look to see if they have that in front of them. But if they don't, I'm going to preface me tossing this over to them and encourage you to reach out to us at the Public Information Office at PIO at census.gov if you have specific questions about data that we can help provide it and paint your stories. Gentlemen?
Thank you, Michael. I can take that one. So for the 2020 census, the ways in which we're measuring diversity are detailed in our America Counts story on diversity. And we're looking beyond the measures that have been used in the past, such as the minority-majority construct, to really see the complex diversity that exists within our nation. And so we have results that talk about a diversity index, prevalence maps, prevalence ranking scores, and those really help to give a more detailed, nuanced understanding of our nation's racial and ethnic diversity. So I encourage you to check out that story and reach out to us if you have additional questions.
Thanks for that. Operator, do we have a next caller?
The next question is coming from Sunita Sorabji, India West Publications. Your line is open.
Thank you so much for taking my call. Taking my question rather. I was wondering where I could find disaggregated data on the Asian American population, and if you could summate some of your findings specifically on the Indian American population.
Thanks for that line of questioning on aggregated data on Asian American and specifically. I'm going to go ahead and toss that back over to our population division experts.
Thank you, Michael, and thanks for the question. So we have a lot of data left to put together for the 2020 census. The data released today for the public law redistricting file focuses on the major categories within race and Hispanic origin. What's exciting about the 2020 census is that we collected for the very first time detailed disaggregated information from all population groups. We had a write-in line in areas with dedicated for white and Black respondents to report their detailed identities for the very first time. And as we move forward in our data collection, processing, and coding, we'll be looking at the 2020 census results in a file called the Detailed Demographic and Housing Characteristics file. That's where you'll be able to receive information on myriad groups across the country, whether they be detailed Asian groups, detailed Black or African American groups, American Indian Alaska Native tribes and Native villages, as well as detailed groups for white, Middle Eastern, European, and North African populations. So stay tuned. There's a lot more information yet to release from the 2020 census.
When will that be released?
So the releases that we have planned for the detailed DHC are going to go through a process that's similar to the public law redistricting file in terms
Looks like we've got a little technical difficulties there. We'll get Nick back on to address that question and apologize for that. Operator, can we have our next caller?
Certainly. The next question is coming from Mia Salantri, WUSA 9. Your line is open.
Hi there. Can you hear me?
Your line.
Oh, hello?
You may ask your question.
Yes, we can hear you now.
Hi. Yes, can you hear me? I apologize.
Can hear you now. Go ahead with your question.
Okay. Thank you. I was just wondering if you could go into a little bit more detail into the question design changes for race and ethnicity. What exactly changed, and how do you perceive how the question changes altered the way that people respond and the data that we got from that?
Thanks for that question, specifically about the question design that we went over in our presentation. And I'll toss that over to Nicholas Jones, who can address that line of question. Nicholas?
Mike, I think I'm back online, and I heard the question was about the question format and the impacts on the 2020 results.
That's correct.
So we're not surprised about the results that we see in the 2020 census, given that we asked two separate questions. We made a lot of efforts to improve the designs, the data processing, and the coding, and you see that in the results as they compare back to 2010. So I encourage you to read our stories about the overview of race and Hispanic origin, as well as our pre-release blog that we issued last week to talk about some of these results in more detail. Thanks for your question.
Thanks for that, Nicholas. And also, just reaching back out, Michael McEnone, please give us a call, PIO at census.gov, and we'll make sure and circle back or complete that second part to your question that got cut off earlier. But Nicholas, if you remember what it was, you can address it now. Don't want to put you on the spot.
No, sorry, Mike, I lost the technical feed, so be happy to talk about that later.
Quite all right. We're working through it just like everyone else, doing everything remotely now. So, operator, can we have our next caller?
And the next question is coming from Edwin Okongo. Ms. Hale, your line is open.
Hi.
Thank you for. Would you please speak a little bit about foreign-born population and how it's changed over the last 2 or 3 decades, and whether there's data on country of origin?
Thanks for that line of question on the foreign pop. And it looks like our population division experts are going to be very popular during today's news conference. So I'll toss it back over to them.
Michael, I can take that one. So while we don't have measures in the decennial census on the foreign-born population or nativity, those data are collected and processed and tabulated every year in our American Community Survey. So I encourage you to reach out to our Public Information Office to get some detailed information and connect you with subject matter experts who can talk with you about that particular data. Thanks, Michael.
Thank you, Nicholas. And tossing it back to the operator, do we have our next caller?
Yes, and the next question is coming from Theo Keefe, KMSP-TV. Your line is open.
Hi, I'm wondering if you have net migration data, and if so, can tell us which states in the Midwest saw net migration increases, domestic and international.
Thanks for that line of question on net migration in the states, and specifically, you pointed out the Midwest. I'm going to toss that over to Mark Perry, the Population Division. Mark?
Sure, thanks for that question. We don't actually have migration data from the 2020 census. We essentially just have the population count. But what we do, and what we have been and will continue to be doing, is to be analyzing the 2020 data in concert with our post-census population estimates program. So every year, as you may know, we produce population estimates for the nation, states, metropolitan and micropolitan statistical areas, and all cities and towns. And with respect to domestic and international migration, we look at counties and states, and that's one of the components that we release every year. So what we'll be doing is looking at the 2010 and the 2020 census counts, looking at the domestic and international migration components, and over the coming year, we'll be doing evaluation of those post-census estimates to see how they align with the 2020 results.
Thanks for that, Mark. Operator, do we have our next caller? Next question.
And the next question is coming from Eric Schmid, St. Louis Public Radio. Your line is open.
Good afternoon. My question is, I know that the census this year collected more detailed information on sexual partners, so whether people were in LGBTQ IA plus relationships. I'm wondering, moving forward, what the Bureau's plans are to collect more detailed information on non-binary and transgender people, as that did not occur in this census.
Thanks for that line of question on SOGI data collection. I'll toss that back over to population, but I think Ron Jarman, our acting director, might have something to say, because we have, if you don't know, a couple of experimental data products that are out there that are collecting some of these data sets.
Yeah, here, just real fast before I toss it over to my much more knowledgeable colleagues. Just this week, we released results from our household poll survey, which is something that we stood up in response to the pandemic last year. And for the first time, we have a full suite of SOGI questions on the household poll survey. There's also a few other surveys, crime surveys and whatnot that have that information. But, you can glean some information from the census and the ACS, and I'll turn over to Mark or Nicholas if they want to tackle that.
I don't have too much to add on top of that. I mean, I'll just chime in and say that we do have the additional products coming out next year from the detailed demographic and housing characteristics file that will be looking at content on household and family formation and the like.
Thanks for that, gentlemen. Operator, do we have our next caller?
Yes, the next question is from Joel Patterson-Gordon, Government Technologies. Your line is open.
Hi, thank you. I was interested in the differential privacy algorithm, and if you could speak to some of the impact of that and what sort of the accuracy limitations that need to be accounted for when interpreting these findings.
Thanks for that question on differential privacy. And before I toss it over to Ron Jarman, Dr. Jarman, I'll just note that for those who aren't aware, we did release our last experimental data product, or this past Tuesday, and had a webinar. And I encourage you to go to census.gov and click on disclosure avoidance to get that information and to see where we are in our analyses and using disclosure avoidance and differential privacy. Ron?
Yes, so thank you, Michael, and thanks for that question. So as you know, differential privacy is the method that we're choosing to protect the confidentiality of our responded data for the 2020 census. It's also a technique that we've used for several other census data products over the last several years pretty successfully. I will say that, one of the things when we were getting ready to do the census and we were doing research on what were the barriers and motivators for people to respond to the census, the confidentiality of their responses was very high up there. And so we knew that we needed to take that even more seriously than the law requires us to, and to make sure that people could trust that the data that they provided us was kept confidential. So we've worked closely with stakeholders and also with the Department of Justice on tailoring our algorithms to provide the best information that we could for redistricting and in the future for the DHC products, conditional on maintaining that confidentiality. And so I think we are confident that at the levels of aggregation that are needed for drawing district boundaries and whatnot, that when you sum the data up, you're going to get very good resolution in the data. For very small areas and very small groups, there could be some noise, but that's what's required in order to maintain the confidentiality. So I think, encourage you to look at the resources that Michael mentioned earlier. I think there's lots of stuff out there for you to look at. And again, we did release the last set of demonstration data earlier today. So thank you.
Thanks for that, Ron.
Thank you.
Operator, do we have our next caller?
And the next question is coming from Tara Bahampour of the Washington Post. Your line is open.
Hi, Tara.
Hi, can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
So my question is in multi-parts. Real quickly, the white population shrank by about 20 million people, if I have this accurate. But I'm a little unclear here whether they dipped below 60%, because we heard that earlier from someone in the questions, but we're not able to confirm that. So can you confirm that? the 20 million and also whether it's under 60%? And then can you discuss how much this is related or possibly related to change in how people self-identified? And then finally, can you verify whether the under 18 population became more than 50% people of color or non-white?
Thanks for those questions. We got this all down, and we'll chew on this and toss it around the horn and try to address this three-part question. I'm going to turn it over to our population division experts, Mark Perry and Nicholas Jones, to give you some feedback on not just the white population shrinking, self-identification, and the under 18 population going up. Gentlemen?
Thank you, Michael. I can take that one. So we have a lot of great information in our America Counts story that were released today on the overview of race and Hispanic origin, as well as our America Counts story on diversity. One of the measures that we detail is the look at composition from a perspective of race with the alone, or in combination populations, where you see, for one, the white alone population, which decreased by 8.6% over 10 years, was offset by the increase in the multiracial population within the white population. We refer to that as the white alone or in combination population. That group rose by about 300%, as you can see here on the slide. We also have detailed findings looking at race reportings among the Hispanic origin population, and you can see differences there in the reporting of white alone, as well as very tremendous increases in reporting of multiracial groups within the Hispanic origin population. That level of detail is in our America Counts stories, and you can understand the nuances with both our improvements to the questions as well as demographic change to really get a better feel and an understanding of the story that we see now in 2020 with this new portrait. The last thing I'll say about your question on the under 18 population, that's detailed as well in our America Counts story, and we see differences in the patterns for children, the population under 18, compared to the patterns of adults, those 18 and over. And that really details a look at how the future generations may be comprised demographically when you look at the concepts of race and Hispanic origin. So Tara, thank you for your questions.
Thanks, Nicholas. Operator, do we have our next caller?
And we're currently waiting for more parties to queue up. One moment, please.
Could you repeat that?
The next question is coming. Certainly. And the next question is coming from Rez Barber, TV1 USA. Your line is open.
Okay. Good evening, gentlemen. My question is where I can find the data of the growth of South Asian, especially Muslims in the metropolitan area and other parts of the USA.
Thanks for that line of question. I'm going to pass that over to our very popular folks over in Population Division. Mark and Nicholas?
Thank you, Michael. I can take that one also. So again, we have information that will be released in the future from the 2020 census, looking at detailed disaggregated groups such as South Asian detailed groups, Pakistani, Asian Indian, Bengali, Bangladeshi, many others. That's true for both the Asian population as well as our other racial and ethnic groups that we're releasing today in an aggregate form. So I encourage you to stay tuned for the results from 2020 in our detailed demographic and housing characteristics file. We also have yearly estimates available through the American Community Survey. You can see some of that information and track over the past several years detailed results for detailed Asian groups. Michael, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Nicholas. Thank you. Operator, do we have anyone else? Another caller?
We have no further questions in queue.
Well, if there's no other callers, I'd like to thank everyone. Thank you, everyone. Today gives us an in-depth look at how the U.S. population has grown and changed since the 2020 census. Local leaders who choose to use this data make decisions such as where to build roads and hospitals, and even how to respond to natural disasters and future pandemics. You will find many materials related to the release of the 2020 Census Redistricting PL 94-171 summary files data on our website, including the American account stories that we've mentioned today. Also, there are data visualizations, a news release, and a comprehensive press kit with all the materials about today's release. Please visit census.gov to access this information. Members of the media, please, again, contact us at pio@census.gov or call 1-877-861-2010 for any additional questions. Again, thank you all for joining us. On behalf of the Census Bureau, it's a privilege to provide the 2020 Census Redistricting Data Summary Files to you. We relied heavily on your responses to the 2020 Census. We are honored to be able to return your data to you, and it goes without saying that it took the efforts of many Census partners, temporary and permanent employees, their dedication and diligent work to make today a reality. We look forward to releasing even more rich data about our nation in the coming year. Remember to follow us on social media at U.S. Census Bureau to stay up to date on our latest news. That concludes our briefing for today. Thank you for joining us.
Lesson 2, Understanding the Data, PL 94-171 Data Files, Topics, and Geographies. Today you're going to learn what data are available in terms of geography and the subjects covered in the data. You will also learn what other circumstances the data could possibly be used for outside of the purposes of redistricting. Public Law 94-171 directs the Census Bureau to provide states the opportunity to identify small geographic areas for which specific data tabulations are needed and deliver high-quality tabulations for those geographic areas to the states in a timely manner for the purpose of legislative redistricting. The data in the 2020 Census PL 94-171 redistricting data files are derived from response data collected from the 2020 census. This decennial, the Census Bureau added data for the group quarters population by major group quarters type. Let's take a look at the PL 94-171 redistricting data file topics you can access. The redistricting products contain summary statistics on population and housing subjects. For the tables that start with P, the P stands for population. And for the table that starts with H, the H stands for housing. The official titles of the 6 tables that will be available to you are as follows. The P1 table presents the population breakdown by race. Redistricting data is offered for White, Black, American Indian and Alaska Native, Asian, Native Hawaiian and other Pacific Islander, and some other race. It is also available for those who select any combination of these 6 races. The P2 table presents data for Hispanic or Latino and not Hispanic or Latino by race. The P3 table presents race for the population 18 years and over. The P4 table presents Hispanic or Latino and not Hispanic or Latino by race for the population 18 years and over. The P5 table presents group quarters population by major group quarters type. Group quarters type is broken down into institutionalized and non-institutionalized group quarters. This table includes the total population counts for institutional group quarters, such as correctional facilities for adults, juvenile facilities, nursing facilities, and other institutional facilities, as well as non-institutionalized group quarters, such as college university housing, military quarters, and other non-institutional facilities. The H1 table presents occupancy status. This table includes total housing unit counts, as well as counts of occupied and vacant housing units. When talking about redistricting, it's important that these three administrative geographies are understood. Geography is always a central topic when talking about Census Bureau data because you must define the container for your data. These geographies are related to redistricting because they form the container of voters for the respective government representatives. Congressional districts are the 435 areas from which members are elected to the U.S. House of Representatives. The number of representatives per state is updated after each decennial census. State legislative districts are the areas from which members are elected to the upper and lower chambers of the state legislatures. These are updated after each decennial census. The Census Bureau first reported data for the state legislative districts as part of the 2000 Public Law 94-171 redistricting data file. Voting districts refer to the generic name for the geographic entities, such as precincts or wards or election districts, established by state governments for the purpose of conducting elections. Redistricting data are available for these common geographies you see on this hierarchy chart. The geographies in the center line of this graphic work like nesting dolls. The smallest level of geography is the block. Blocks are aggregated to form a block group. Block groups form a tract, and so on. You may have noticed there are numbers next to the geographies. Every geography is given a summary level code. For example, a tract is given the summary level code 140. In later lessons, you will learn about how to use these codes to find data. As stated earlier, the Census Bureau will furnish the government and state majority and minority legislative leaders, redistricting commissions, when applicable, and the nonpartisan state liaisons with the 2020 census population counts for the geographic areas needed to perform legislative redistricting. So, for example, states, congressional districts, state legislative districts, American Indian areas, counties, cities, towns, census tracts, census block groups, and census blocks. You don't see city and town in this graphic, but in Census Bureau terminology, that is equivalent to places or county subdivisions in the Northeast. Let's talk a little bit more about boundaries. You know that the center line of geographies nest within each other. So tracts and blocks wouldn't cross county lines because they nest inside each other. So when looking at tract level data within a county, the tract data would be whole or complete. But what about some of the geographies that don't fall within the center line? A voting district is a geography used for the purpose of elections, and therefore would not cross a county line. You see how voting districts are branched off of county, so they nest within the county. While congressional and state legislative districts can cross certain geographies, such as a county, they wouldn't cross a state line. But data files for smaller geographies under these state legislative districts or places could contain tract portion data or remainder data. Another way to think of this is if you overlay a voting district map on top of a map of tracts, you can see sometimes tracts might cover multiple voting district boundaries. Data users who need to go into a more in-depth analysis of geographic entities or relationships can find support through our suite of geographic support products. Here is a comprehensive list of geographic support products. The 2020 Census PL 94171 redistricting data are tabulated based on the geographic areas provided in these products. The suite of products includes tiger line shapefiles, reference maps, block assignment files, name lookup tables, and 2010 to 2020 tabulation block crosswalk tables. Some data users will prefer to look at maps, others will prefer to work with text files to understand which blocks nest within other geographies. Click on the links to learn more about the products and download them. When you select a topic such as race from the P1 race data table and a geography such as a state legislative district, you will discover the population count of the race iterations in the state legislative districts. Analyzing these data is how redistricting officials make decisions about how to delineate their districts. Now that we know the purpose of the redistricting data program is to comply with the law, which 1, provides the data state officials need to redraw the boundaries of the congressional and state legislative districts, and 2, provide the data needed so that states can comply with the redistricting rules or laws. The general guiding principle of redistricting is designed so that each person has an equal say of one person and one vote. This course doesn't cover redistricting laws and standards, but in general, legislative districts are drawn so that districts are within an acceptable range of the ideal district population. The ideal district population number is calculated by dividing the state population by the number of districts. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 is also tied to redistricting data because Section 2 states that a voting practice is unlawful if it results in discrimination based on race, color, or membership in a language minority group. Redistricting can vary from state to state. For example, some states have different deadlines, some states use commissions, and others do not. Because the PL files will be the first 2020 census product release that will include demographic and housing characteristics data for detailed geographic areas, some may be interested in accessing these data for a variety of purposes. Many may be generally interested in comparing available data between decennial censuses, or comparing the 2020 decennial census and new data that is collected over the next 10 years. Analysts may be interested in combining the tabular data from the PL tables with the spatial geography data and voting data from their precincts. The 2020 census population data establishes the benchmark for future population estimates and projections, which is calculated annually. While more data and tabulations from the 2020 census will be released in the coming months, the data provided in this initial data release may also be of interest to those who need data on these topics covered, someone like a voting researcher or a grant writer, for example. Here's what you've learned in Lesson 2. You learned about PL 94171 files, the purpose for redistricting files, and the subjects you will find in each of the PL 94171 data files. Then we introduced beginner census geography concepts so you could understand how geography is the container for the data you're looking at and essential to how you access and view data. We then discussed other uses for the redistricting data and that they could include comparing data sets or be interesting to various researchers.
Welcome and thank you for standing by. Your lines are in listen-only mode until today's question and answer session. If you would like to queue up to ask a question, you may do so by pressing star and then 1. Today's conference is being recorded. If you have any objection, you may disconnect at this time. I would now like to turn the call over to Tyson Weister. You may begin.
Hi, thank you. And thank you all for joining the webinar this afternoon. My name is Tyson Weister. I work at the U.S. Census Bureau Center for Enterprise Dissemination. Today we're going to talk about accessing census data in 2019, the transition to data.census.gov. So our goal for everyone on the call is to make sure you all walk away with a clear understanding of the longer-term vision we're working towards with data.census.gov, especially for those of you who may be newer and hearing about this more recently. Then we'll take a look at the current snapshot where we are at today with the site. The focus of the webinar today will be on providing a live demonstration. So 1 week ago on April 2nd, we released a lot of updates to the site that we want to highlight for you all. And in addition, we want to make sure that we take you through a full tour of the site and make sure you all leave the webinar today feeling comfortable accessing tables, maps, and profiles from data.census.gov. Talk about some tips and tricks during the live demo and afterwards, and then give you all a sneak preview at what we're working on right now to see where we're going and open it up for questions. So that long-term vision for data.census.gov is tied to the Census Bureau's mission to serve as the leading source of quality data about the nation's people and economy. Ever since the first census in 1790, we've been collecting and processing quality information, but it hasn't always been the easiest to find. And here's a look at why. So we launched census.gov in 1994, and since then we've organically added individual tools and applications over time. This is just a small selection of some of the most popular ones, but there's actually hundreds of different tools and applications where you can access census data now. Couple of problems with this. One, you need to know to go to external sites in order to access the information. And two, you had to take time to learn each tool individually, and the skills you learned in accessing data for the Census Bureau in one tool weren't necessarily transferable in helping you access Census Bureau data in another tool. So with this, we've received overwhelming feedback to make things simple, put things all in one place for you, and that's where we're headed with data.census.gov. It's much larger than the replacement of any one particular tool. What we're working towards is making all of the Census Bureau data accessible to you in one place. So to look at this another way, here we have in the upper right the before picture of how we've been doing things all along, where the Census Bureau collects information, processes, edits, and reviews it, and then disseminates it out through multiple websites that you have to navigate to and know to sort through in order to access the end result data on the right-hand side that you're looking for. With enterprise dissemination, we continue to collect information, prepare, edit, review it, disseminate it one time through the Census Bureau's API on a single platform where you can search in order to access the Census Bureau data all in one place. Some benefits of this listed on the upper left-hand side of the slide. Our goal is for you all to spend less time searching for data and more time using it by streamlining your access. Enterprise dissemination also allows us to maintain the best functionality of our current tools when we have something that's working particularly well. For instance, mapping functionality on Census Business Builder, we can take that functionality, take best practices, develop it one time on data.census.gov, and apply it across all of the Census Bureau's data for that mapping functionality instead of the select few estimates that are on Census Business Builder. We can also reduce redundancies and operational costs. For data.census.gov, we deliver and review the data one time on the API and the single platform instead of duplicating this process across hundreds of different tools and applications. And everything from data.census.gov is fed from the Application Programming Interface, or API, which allows us to provide you greater access. In the short term, you're seeing greater access to the API as more data. So as some examples, for the first time, there's new surveys and programs that are loading their data into the API specifically so that their data can also be available on this platform, data.census.gov. Also, for data that you already know and love from the API, like the American Community Survey, you'll see additional types of tables added that go hand in hand with this project. So as an example, right now you can access selected population profiles from the API on the live site. So the long-term vision for data.census.gov, we've been operating a while, since 2016, as a preview site. We're transitioning to becoming the primary way of accessing data from the Census Bureau, and then our long-term vision would be that you would just go to census.gov to access this information rather than data.census.gov. We're not quite to the point of merging into the single search bar on census.gov, but that is what we're working towards in the long-term vision to streamline your access. So with that long vision, let's take a look at where we are today with data.census.gov. In the platform now, you have access to data from the American Community Survey from 2010 forward. Here we have a look at selected types of tables from the ACS with check marks indicating data available in the platform now, and blank cells showing you data that's coming soon. In addition to the American Community Survey, you also have access to selected data from the decennial census in 2010. We're continuing to work to add those additional types of tables, as well as data from Census 2000 on data.census.gov. For the economic census, we have the 2012 basic U.S. data, as well as county business patterns and non-employer statistics from 2012 forward. In the 2017 column, again, you see those blank cells showing you some upcoming data releases. Also in the platform, survey of business owners, selected tables from there as well. So that's what's available now. In the longer term, we're continuing at the Census Bureau to onboard more surveys and programs and migrate data from American Fact Finder into the new platform for you to access. But that was just a look at the current snapshot for you all. In addition to the current snapshot, this is where we're looking at going over the next couple of seasons here. So right now, at the end of spring and moving into early summer, we're going to have the first data releases exclusively on the new platform, data.census.gov. These are smaller releases, but from the economic surveys and programs, non-employer statistics, and public sector data from the Census of Governments and annual programs. With those releases, we're also moving into summer, having the end of new data releases on American Fact Finder. What this means is after June, there will be no more new data loaded into American Fact Finder. We are working to keep AFF around a little bit longer, but only as an archive to access the data that's there prior to June. This gives us a little bit of extra time to continue to migrate the data from AFF to the API and data.census.gov. It gives you all some time to access that historical information from a way that you're comfortable and used to doing now, and then also a little extra time for you all to get transitioned over to using data.census.gov. So we hope that most of our data users will be like all of you who chose to join the call today and proactively think about these things ahead of time and getting acclimated in advance. But when you're really going to feel the release, if you haven't fully acclimated to data.census.gov, we do have those major releases in fall with the American Community Survey, the 2018 vintage, as well as the 2017 economic census release in September. Beyond the milestones shown on this timeline, another important aspect of what we're doing is our Agile development process. What this means is every 2 months, we work on improvements to the system, develop them, push them out live publicly, and allow you to provide feedback to help drive our future development and keep us on track. So those updates every 2 months will continue well past fall of 2019. Earlier, we talked about the release last week on April 2nd. This is a small selection of some examples of feedback that helped drive some of the improvements that we pushed live. Not going to go one by one, but just to highlight from that release, we pushed out the new look and feel, rolled out improved navigation, and also enhanced table display. So let's actually go ahead and take a look at some of that here on the live site. You all are welcome to follow along if you'd like. It's the public site, data.census.gov. Again, wanting to show you all the refresh, but also take you through a tour of the site and make sure you're comfortable accessing tables, maps, and web pages. Here on the landing page, we have that refresh of the website where you have the updated look and feel, updated font, color palettes, and button styles that match all of the great work we rolled out to the rest of census.gov last August. This will help give you that cohesive experience across the site. On the landing page, we also, based on user feedback, implemented an additional button here for the advanced search. Some canned searches here that you can click on if you want some help getting started. In the lower left, there's also a feedback box that will follow you throughout the site. Again, it says send feedback, stedfi.feedback@census.gov. Particularly with this release, just as true as in the past, we want to make sure we're getting as much feedback as possible to help make sure that we can provide you what you want and need in a dissemination system, and getting that feedback in writing is the best way to get it over to us. One other thing I'd like to point out here on the site, when you scroll to the very bottom in the lower right-hand corner, the release notes and FAQs, we'll talk more about that later, but here's where you access them. There's lots of great information to keep you up to date and help you get started if you're new to the site. So with the overview of the landing page improvements, let's go ahead and get into some of our searches. I'm going to show you 2 examples in the single search bar and 1 example from the advanced search. Just like American Fact Finder and other ways you've been accessing census data, there's multiple paths to get to the end result you're looking for, and we recommend starting out with whatever's most important to you. So as an example, we could start with the geography here, Arizona, and we'll pull up the Arizona profile to provide that high-level look. So by choosing that here, we have the profile for Arizona with some basic information at the top about that geography. Also near the top, the 4 most popular statistics from the Census Bureau for Arizona. And as we scroll down, you can see the scroll here on the right-hand side is pretty lengthy. We get lots of detailed information, kind of these high-level statistics, but also some breakdowns in easy-to-digest ways here. Pretty comprehensive, covering a number of topics from the Census Bureau. So we have nice bar charts as well as maps. As an example here, we can take a look at foreign-born. We see 13.2% of the population in Arizona foreign-born versus 13.7% for the United States overall. And then we can see that breakout here by county in the map. With the refresh, we updated some of the labeling here so you can differentiate these high-level estimates, as well as adding here on the left-hand side clickable links. If you see something of interest like education, we can click on that, and it takes you exactly to that part of the profile where you want to go. So with this, we'll go ahead and click in the upper left. If you want to restart your search and start fresh, click where it says United States Census Bureau. That takes you to the landing page, cleans everything out of your search. Next, I'm going to go ahead and type in my second search. I want to pull up health insurance coverage statistics for Arizona, looking at that high level for the total population. And then I'm going to drill down and start looking at health insurance coverage for the young adult male population. So starting again, I can put whatever's most important to me. That may be Arizona to start. It may be your topic. But once you have your topic plus your geography, Arizona health insurance, go ahead and run that search. That takes you to the all results page that you're seeing here. Notice you have tables, maps, and web pages all here on the same page. And when you scroll down, you'll start seeing some of your results. So we have the top 3 results, as well as a button to view all tables. Same thing for maps and view all maps. And just waiting a moment here for this to load. As a reminder, this is a developing site, so sometimes it does help to start fresh. Go ahead and give this one more try here. Okay, so here we have the table that we were looking for, the selected characteristics of health insurance coverage in the United States. This particular table is a subject table from the American Community Survey that has risen to the top of our search results. Subject tables do tend to appear first, simply because they have all the information you need in the first line. So with this, we can see for our geography, the total civilian non-institutionalized population for Arizona being the 6,701,990. And as we follow that line across the table, it gives us that quick win. So we can see 87.8% in Arizona, and 12.2% that don't have health insurance in Arizona. From here, I'm going to click where it says View All Tables. And this takes us to our table results page here. So on the left-hand side, we see that we have 83 results matching Arizona and matching health insurance. As we scroll down, we have the option to load additional tables to get to our full 83 results. If you wanted to narrow that down a bit, again, you also have access on this page to the single search bar, as well as to your filter panel here beside where it says 83. Clicking that will give you an experience similar to the advanced search. We're going to cover that later, so I'm going to hide that for now, but just want to point out you do have ways to narrow your search right here on this page. So we had talked earlier about wanting to drill into data for the young adult male population in Arizona. Because that's one of the more popular cross-tabulations of health insurance topic, it does happen to be here towards the top of our results. So I'm going to click where it says B27001. Give that just a moment to load up here. So here we have the table, health insurance coverage status, by sex, by age. A couple things to point out that are new with this. With the refresh, we push live. You have these orange bars here underneath tables, as well as on the left-hand side with some nice shading behind it. So you have a much clearer view as to where you are navigation-wise in the website. With the refresh on the top, we also have the table title, health insurance coverage status, by sex, by age. For the first time with the table title, you can see the year that estimate belongs to as a default 2017, and also whether it comes from the 1-year or 5-year ACS estimates. Another quick thing to point out that you'll notice if you've been using data.census.gov before Monday, you would have seen an experience very similar to this as your default view, where you had fixed column widths and cutoff information, but all of this extra white space to the right-hand side of your screen that wasn't being used. It's one of the ways that we're working to make the site work better for you going forward, particularly with this refresh. So I had clicked in the upper right, Customize Table, to get into that full table view, and we'll start taking a look here at the data. So essentially just scroll down. You can also choose to click on these arrows to minimize certain categories if you're not interested in the level of detail for that. And pretty quickly, we can get here to 19 to 25 years. So we see that's falling under males. For that estimate in Arizona, there's a total of 331,451 men aged 19 to 25. Out of that population, we see 78,320 do not have health insurance. Scrolling back up a little bit, just want to show you all with the refresh as well, some access to your table controls. Prior to these updates we pushed live, you would have seen all of your table controls on the left-hand side with the full table view. As of now, you get a very distinct view where it takes up the full size of your screen, so you can look at all of the data across your screen. And when you click the upper right, that chevron, it opens up your controls to do a lot of neat things with the table. We'll walk you through just a couple of them. I'm going to start first by clicking Download, Print, and Share in order to show you the downloads here. We'll click first on 2017 and 2016. The nice thing about the downloads is you can download across years for this single table, as well as between the 1 and 5 year estimates. Having made those selections, click Download in the lower right. Let it load up here to 100%, and then click that Download Now button. So then, depending on your browser, will determine the way that you'll start to open your zip file from there. And we have our set of 6 files. So essentially what we're looking at here, we have the naming convention ACS for American Community Survey, DT for Detailed Tables, then you see 5Y for 5 year. This is the 5-year estimates for the period ending in 2016 or ending in 2017. And then we have the table ID, B27001. To get the data with all of the labels, you want to go to the files with the naming convention Data with Overlays. So I'm going to open up the one here for 2017, and we'll take a quick look just to compare it to the table view in data.census.gov. So starting with that third row, we see the geo ID corresponding to Arizona, and then all of the estimates from the table that we saw just a moment ago. I'm going to scroll over to the right to column W, and starting at the top, we see the variable name B27001 underscore 011E. That tells us it's the 11th estimate from that table. It also is matching the API variable name, so if you're looking to get information from the API, you can also get that from the table downloads. The second cell here shows data, the label for that, the total number of males aged 19 to 25 years with no health insurance. And then finally, that third entry is the 78,320. That's the same estimate that we had looked at on the table display in data.census.gov. Minimizing out of those things, also a lot of things in the left-hand side of your table controls that you can do. One is the ability to add and remove a geography. So once you click Change Geography, you can click on one of the options here on the left, something like County, and then drill down into a particular state, such as Arizona. And I'm going to choose the largest county by population in Arizona, Maricopa County. You can either click that checkbox or the word or phrase, and you'll see that your selection's been made. So scrolling down, we do have the ability to confirm. We see Maricopa County, Arizona, and health insurance as our filters. In the upper right-hand side, once I click that down chevron, it'll minimize the filter panel, or I can click anywhere outside of the white area where it's gray or blue. As we made that selection, the table was already working hard in the background, so we have that third column here for Maricopa County. You can also swap between years by clicking Change Year, 2016, and minimizing that panel, and change the year back. Once again, by clicking that Change Year button, deselecting 2016, give it just a moment for it to register your other selections as clickable, and choose 2017. And then go back into your table. You can also swap back and forth between the ACS 1-year estimates and the 5-year. And then just like before, As you see in the lower left side, we do have margin of error available, just as a click away if you want to toggle on and off. Again, all of those estimates from the ACS are based on just the sample, so there is error associated with every one of those estimates to just be mindful of and check out as you're working with the data. One other thing I'd like to note here is under download, there's also view data notes. These are the table notes that you'll want to take a look at as well. Having gone through a lot of those table controls, let's flip over to the maps. I'm going to click here where it says Tables 1 in the upper left. And what that's actually going to take us back to are the full results for Arizona and health insurance. I see in my left navigation panel, I'm still clicked into that same table I was before. So to get to the maps, you just click up at the top where it says Maps. It still maintains your selection here on the left-hand side and begins creating that map for you. So here we also have the maps pulled up previously where we're able to see it's created that map for the state level. And you should be able to make some quick adjustments here. As an example, the default geography would be to have that map at the state level. In the upper right, you can swap back and forth between different layers like state and county, and it knows that I've selected Maricopa County in the background in my selections. You also can add or remove geographies on the map. In the lower right-hand side here, we have that rectangle selection tool. Once you click that, you'll notice it changes to blue, and you can draw a rectangle to select additional counties for your map, as well as clicking an individual county, selecting it on a one-by-one basis. And just like you click a county and select it, you could also choose to click a county and deselect if you'd like, as well as at the top, you're able to see that exact estimate from the county. Working here in the upper right-hand side, again, we also can swap between the ACS one-year estimates and the 5-year. Notice when I do choose those one-year estimates, we have some counties here in gray. That just means that they don't meet the population threshold of 65,000 or more people to make data for the ACS one-year estimates. I want a complete map, so I'm going to choose the 5-year. And so far, we've been mapping the default estimate, which is just your first line on the table for the total population. If we want to look at what we were showing in the table display and in the download, we could choose from that drop-down, male, 19 to 25 years, no health insurance coverage estimate. And from what we see in here, the counties in darker shades of blue have higher numbers of men without health insurance in that age group. Moving on here to our last example, we walked through 2 quick wins with single search and took you through a tour of tables and maps. I'm going to click once again in the upper left where it says U.S. Census Bureau. And now we want to show you an example from the advanced search. So as you guessed, click on the advanced search. Couple things to point out. One thing you'll want to do first is scroll to the bottom and work with these filters. We've been working with some of them through the table controls already. One thing that may be helpful to select through the advanced search is to specify a particular survey, program, or type of table from the American Community Survey. That's all accessible to you by clicking the survey filter in the left-hand side. And here you'll have different options available. At the very top will be American Community Survey tables. I want to work with one of those, and in my example, I'm going to look for data for the Japanese alone population to see the total as well as some characteristics. That data happens to come from the ACS one-year selected population profiles, so we click ACS one-year selected population profiles, scroll down towards the bottom, and we do see that's been added to our search query. From there, you'll want to specify that Japanese alone group, and that's where we're going to start by clicking on topics. Just as an item of note, we have improved and made the way we refer to topics consistent across data.census.gov and census.gov. Our word of recommendation is to take some time exploring these new topics just to familiarize yourself a little bit. You will notice topics for common things like education, health insurance, and income are also in the same panel with things like populations and people and race and ethnicity, which also include your detailed population groups. Maybe a little bit different than how you're used to accessing the data in American Fact Finder. To get to Japanese alone, as you would imagine, you click where it says race and ethnicity. And here we see we can start making selections. So at the very top, you do have that box to choose race and ethnicity, or you have items without checkboxes. So any item with a checkbox would be a final selection that's added to your search criteria. Any word or phrase without a checkbox means it's going to open a detailed panel up to your right and give you more options for your particular search. So to get to Japanese alone, of course, you click where it says Asian and open up that panel. Again, you have general categories at the top, as well as that option to click where it says Detailed Asian alone. So from here, you just simply scroll down until you see your population group of interest. Here I'll click where it says 022, which is the code for that population group in the API. And one other thing to note while we're on this page, you will notice there are some population groups that are grayed out until we get the data loaded from the American Community Survey 5-year estimates for the selected population tables and American Indian tables, as well as migrate that data from Summary File 2 from the decennial census. Some of these population groups will be grayed out, but once we get the data from our data providers loaded in, we'll make sure that you're able to access data for the population groups overall. So here we have our search query, Japanese alone, 1-year selected population profiles. I click in the lower right, view all results. So here we have our table. I'm going to click just one more time to take a look at a little bit bigger view. So we see that we're looking at data for the United States, Japanese alone population living in the U.S. in 2017. The total population for that group is an estimated 770,546. And as we scroll down, we can start to look at all of the characteristics from this group, things like their marital status, school enrollment, or educational attainment. So just as a quick example, we could scroll down to the line that says bachelor's degree or higher and see that this group, over 52% has a bachelor's degree or higher. With that live demo, hopefully you all should start to feel comfortable accessing data from the site using the different functionality. Wanted to follow that up with some more detailed guidance and also just kind of recap some of the things we talked about in a different format for you. Again, our single search, we are recommending that as quick wins for all of our users, whether you're just starting out with census data and you want that simple statistic, something like health insurance in Arizona, or that high-level look at a particular geography, like the Arizona profile. We also recommend single search as quick wins for expert users when you know exactly what you want, like that particular industry code, table ID, or groups of tables. Taking a look at some of those examples here in action, on the left-hand side is an example of typing in CP in that single search, which would give you all 5 results for the comparison profiles. Know that particularly for members of the media, this allows you to take a look at a geography over time and how statistics have changed. In the middle here, we have an example of typing in B27 that provides you all 32 detailed base tables for health insurance from the American Community Survey. And on the right-hand side here is an example of typing in B19001. That gives you 13 results. So median household income for the total population, as well as median household income repeated across the major race and ethnicity groups with table IDs ending in A through I. Not only are these quick wins helpful for searching in ACS data, but also having quick wins for other data sets. Here's a quick example looking at a single search bar where we typed in 4451. That is the NAICS code for grocery stores. We also added to the single search all counties in Maryland, and you see that this populated right in our results. This is the very first table that came up in the results. So just another quick example of that win in the single search. Moving on to advanced search, we're recommending that for more complex searches, things like specifying a particular survey, program, or type of table, like the ACS selected population profiles or ACS one-year detailed tables. Also using that as a way to select geographies with complex names like your census tracts, as well as it may be easier to select that single checkbox to get things like all places in the United States. Other complex searches include cross-tabulation, something like health insurance, by full-time, part-time work status, by sex, and your detailed population groups. Those are exclusively available through the advanced search right now. We're working to add them to the single search. We showed you a quick example for the Japanese alone population that corresponds to a detailed population group by race, but we also have hundreds and thousands plus other detailed population groups for tribal areas, Hispanic origin, ancestry, and country of birth. If you'd like more detailed information on how to access data in the advanced search for those groups, we've included slides 17 through 22 with reference material for that, and we'll make sure to email everyone a copy of that following the webinar. Last item of note for the advanced search, we mentioned this in the live demo. Just take some time to familiarize yourself with the topics. They have changed. So with that information, let's take a quick look at some of the things we're working on now. Just like the release we pushed out last Tuesday, we're also working in our next 2-month development cycle on improving the site. Everything's based on user feedback. Here's a small selection of some of the feedback that's driving what we're working on now. What I really want to talk about is what we're doing to improve the way you select geographies. Right now, on the geography filter experience in the advanced search, once you click on the left-hand side, geography, you get a list of summary levels from the Census Bureau. It's a very long list. There's currently no hierarchy. And then common summary levels are buried at the bottom of this long scroll you see here, something like zip code tabulation area as an example. Once you're able to finally sort through all of that complex labeling and choose your level of interest, we're also working with what we call here lazy loading. And what that means is what you're seeing in this second screenshot. So here we've selected county, and then we've selected counties within the state of Alabama. You see I'm almost to the bottom of this scroll, but I'm only to the C's in this result. So what lazy loading means is we're populating the first 30 results in your list of geographies. Once you scroll to the bottom, you'll get the next 30 results in your list. This is something that is by design, feeding all of the information from the API. It's just so much information to feed into our interface and serve out to you in one lump sum. So we do have to do it in sections. Although that is the case, the good news is that we're working on ways to improve your experience, even though lazy loading is something that will continue going forward. So actually, before we get there, as an example, instead of giving you geographies by something like state dash American Indian area, dash off-reservation trust land, dash tribal subdivision remainder or part, another improvement we're working on is to break that down into more manageable pieces where you choose your own path for your geography and break this up into individual clicks of things that actually make sense as you're going along. So this is an example of that in action where we have counties selected here in the first panel. Then we choose counties within state in the second panel, and then we choose the state of Alabama through that third panel. So what that would result in is the list of 67 counties in Alabama. From there, we're working on ways to sort through that list of 67 a little bit more easily. One of the things we're working towards is to add an A to Z click on the right-hand side. As an example, if you wanted to get to Perry County, Alabama, you could just click the P, and it would skip over the lazy loading and load from the P's on forward. Another thing you may have noticed in the upper right of all of these panels is a search icon. Once you click that magnifying glass, you'll have the option to start typing in some words or parts of words which will search that individual list of geography and nothing else. So here we see we've typed in DAL, and we start getting results for the counties with that text in it. That should help with a lot of the majority of users working with the geography filters, but we're also working to make improvements for advanced users as well. One thing is hiding urban rural by default, but making it very obvious here at the top, implementing a toggle to turn on and off those components. So when you would click the toggle, working to add something to where you would then see Dale County urban and Dale County rural. Also, thinking of our advanced users, we're similarly working to add a toggle to show the summary levels. So once you click that toggle, being able to actually have those 3-digit codes, many of you have taken time to figure out what level of geography you're working with in the past, and it's much easier to remember it by that code rather than the jargon name that goes along with it. So being able to scroll and select in order which summary level, and then here in the right, again, having that search icon to be able to search by that as well. Another thing we're working on now is adding more checkboxes to select all geographies in a list, things like all counties in Texas. As you can see here, we have on the right-hand side quite a lengthy list of things that are in the works. This isn't something that you're going to see with the upcoming release, and it may not be something you'll see even for September, because many of the checkboxes for things like all counties in Texas are already meeting the requirements for the geographies that those data sets are released in. So we're working to get them as soon as possible, knowing that many of them are needed for the ACS 5-year release and future releases in December. Things like improving the way you select geographies is all driven by user feedback. So we would once again welcome you to submit your feedback at sedfi.feedback@census.gov. Let us know if we're hitting the mark with some of these improvements. If not, what else we can be doing to make your experience better, and we'll try to address as much as we can before September, but do keep in mind that you probably won't be seeing major changes in terms of navigation, so do start to familiarize yourself with the site as we're going. With that, we'll go ahead and start opening it up for questions. If you don't get a chance to ask your question over the phone, members of the media can contact our Public Information Office at pio@census.gov, 301-763-3030, and all other members can submit questions in writing to sedfi.feedback@census.gov. And we'll go ahead and open it up for questions. Operator?
Thank you. If you would like to ask a question at this time, you may do so by pressing star and then 1. You will be prompted to record your name, which is used to introduce your question. Again, if you would like to ask a question at this time, please press star and then 1. One moment for our first question.
While we're waiting for that first question to come through the queue, we do want to invite you all to check out resources for learning more. We showed you the link at the bottom of data.census.gov to access our release notes and FAQs to get access to your common questions, charts of available data, lists of features and functionality, and known issues. We do update this every 2 months with each release. Also, we have upcoming webinars, like updating the FAQs. We also update you all through these public webinars. Our next webinar will be in June. Another webinar that may be helpful for those of you on the phone, using the Census API with the American Community Survey, June 26th at 2 p.m. You'll be able to get information to join these webinars by visiting the link at the bottom. And if you do go there now, you'll also be delighted to see we have a series of webinars already planned April through June with 58 different webinars on census data. Operator,
the question is from Amy Swan. Your line is open.
Hi, my question is, now that there's the capability to do some mapping, can you explain, is it natural breaks that's used for the legend?
Sure, so we'll go ahead and go back over here first to the map really quickly. Oh, I thought I had that pulled up earlier. There are multiple ways. There's It's the same things that were in American Fact Finder, except we have not implemented the user-defined breaks as of yet. So natural breaks is included, I think quintiles, and there's one other option as well. So it's there and you should be seeing it now. You just have to get to a map and then click on Customize Map here in the right. Sorry, I couldn't find that. So natural breaks is the default. Equal interval is the other one. Thank you for your question.
Thank you.
Our next question is from Dale Miller. Your line is open.
Hi. I actually have two quick questions, I hope. The first is there a way to save a query so that I don't have to recreate it each time that I go in to use the app?
So the answer to that question is yes. So anything in this URL, unlike American Fact Finder where you had to find that special bookmark save button that was hidden in the table view or go through that process to save your query, you can simply copy and paste the URL directly from your browser and it takes you exactly where you were before.
Okay. And then the second question is that I've noticed when I went in and played around with it that if I have multiple geographies, say all of the counties in a state, I noticed that as I scan across to sort of visually take a look, I lose that first column, of course, which has all of the row headers or labels as it would be. Is there a way to change that?
So that is a known issue. As of right now, the reason that we can't address that is in relation to 508 compliance. So we have to make sure that everything's accessible to the entire population. 508 compliance is a mandate for all government websites to be accessible even by folks that may have a disability. So we're running into some technical issues in making that column frozen, which is what you would like because you're able to see it, but also satisfying the requirements to make sure that it's reading the table contents correctly to someone that isn't able to see at all and has to have a screen reader read that information. So definitely good feedback that we'd love to get sent in, and we'll take it back, and it's something that we're aware of, and we'd like to make sure we're meeting both user needs. We're just not aware of a solution as of yet that can make that happen.
Of course, it was available on American Fact Finder, so I'm just curious as to why that would be different in this case. But okay, yeah, I appreciate where you're coming from. Thank you.
I do want to just to note that American Fact Finder was not 508 compliant, so that could definitely be part of the reason, as well as different technology.
Thank you. Our next question is from Dan Hunting. Your line is open.
Hi, I'm wondering if there's going to be any changes to the way PUMS data is presented. Is that going to be on this site, or are we just going to get that through the PUMS site?
I'm very glad that you asked that question. So in terms of getting to the PUMS data sets overall, you could type something like PUMS in the single search bar and get to the web page, which would take you to the FTP site. But beyond that, one of the things that we're working on right now is knowing that one of the options to access PUMS without using statistical software, not sure if you're familiar with Data Ferret, that's something that has not been able to keep up pace with changing technology and browser needs. We are working on adding the functionality to create custom tables using the PUMS on data.census.gov. So as our timeline right now, what we're working towards is hopefully having some sort of public preview beta available in June, but more to come on that.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Our next question is from Meridian Appraisal Group. Your line is open.
Yes, I was wondering when the 2019 income limits will be available.
Sorry, Nate, can you repeat the question, please?
I wonder when the 2019 income limits estimates will be available.
I'm not certain when the data providers will be releasing that, but could you email your question to pio@census.gov and we'll be sure to research and get you an answer to that?
PIO, what was that again?
pio@census.gov, and I'll pull that up here as we're taking additional questions.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
The next question is from Michelle Woodgornick, your line is open.
Thank you. So a few questions. I'm wondering, do the data notes for the downloadable files contain data dictionaries? So essentially, information about the variables.
There's no data dictionary included in the download. You would need to continue to go to the survey websites to access that information.
Okay. Okay. And then in the search box, does it accept Boolean operators, and if so, which ones? Like, can I put and, especially not? Is not available?
We'll have to check on that and get back with you, particularly in reference to the not being available. But if you could email us either the PIO at census.gov, if you're a member of the media, or fedsci.feedback@census.gov, we'll be happy to get back with you on that.
Thank you. Our next question is from Anthony DeBarros with Wall Street Journal. Your line is open.
Hey, good afternoon. I'm wondering if there's any location in the interface that allows me to view on a table-by-table basis what variables are in each table.
I'm not aware of anything in data.census.gov to view the variables outside of the download itself that I showed you, which corresponds to the API. Are you a user of the API?
Yeah, I use various census APIs.
Okay. I know we do have the groups functionality available. So through the discovery tool, you do have the ability to view the variables that are in a particular table.
Okay.
That I can demo for you live here very quickly, but as a recommendation, either email your question or also stay tuned. That may be something that's covered in the upcoming webinar on Census API.
Okay, thank you.
Our next question is from Cassandra Sherrill with the Winston-Salem Journal. Your line is open.
Hi. I haven't had a chance to really play around with the new website very much, but just in looking at you downloading the trial sample there, and this kind of plays with the data dictionary question earlier, some of the headers were just sort of like, appear to be sort of gibberish numbers. How do we sort of marry what the actual English would be with that number?
Sure. Are you referring to this that I showed, the
yes.
Example, the B001_011E?
Yes, stuff like that.
Yeah, so that's the variable name from the API or application programming interface. These downloads in AFF also had variable names with a combination of letters and numbers, but unfortunately those weren't even tied to the API. But if you scroll down to just one cell below, that's where you're getting the label from, and I'll go ahead and expand this so you can see as well beyond a little preview I was working off of here, but hopefully that helps.
Okay, yes.
Thank you. Once again, if you would like to enter to the queue to ask a question, you may do so by pressing star and then 1. Our next question is from Gary Rothstein with the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Your line is open.
Hi, thank you. I am wondering how far back in time the data goes for easy tracking of changes over time. I think you referred to the 2010 ACS. Does it also have the 2010 decennial census, the first ACS, the 2000 census? How far back?
So as of right now, from the ACS, you have 2010 and forward. For decennial, there is some 2010 data there now. We're working to migrate the remaining 2010 tables with a very few small exceptions. We're similarly doing that for Census 2000. So that may not be something that you're seeing until later in the calendar year. In the meantime, you can access that historical information through American Fact Finder, but also longer term, the direction the Census Bureau is going to get that historical information is through the application programming interface. It's also one of the reasons why we highlighted that upcoming webinar as well. So may just be another great resource beyond the other things we mentioned to access historical data.
Thank you.
Our next question is from Miriam with NYU. Your line is open.
Hi, coming back to the table you just had up showing the API variables and the corresponding labels, I see that the labels are not the same labels that are in the tables that were provided in American Fact Finder. And so I'm thinking ahead to creating a correspondence between previous labels and these labels. Will there be a master that indicates what is equivalent to what, either in terms of variable names within a table or labels?
Thank you for your question. In terms of a crosswalk between the exact labeling in AFF and the API, which is where these downloads in data.census.gov coming from, that would be something we'd have to take back to the data providers, so the American Community Survey, to see if they could consider that as a resource for data users that could be put together. As of right now, you should be seeing very similar labels, so hopefully nothing alarming or drastic there. But
when it comes to like age and race or ethnicity categories, are often very similar labels even within a table that are not actually the same. And I've relied, I'm sure others have too, on our exact labels across time to understand what's equivalent over time. So that might be something to raise with them.
Yeah, we could definitely take that back, and also a great example of comments to send to feedback@census.gov.
Thank you. Our next question is from Brian Holmes. Your line is open.
Hello. I'm just wondering about the future of On the Map. You mentioned some of the other tools in the timeline. I just find that extremely useful and with very unique type functionality. Wondering if that's going to get ported over or if it's ever going to be updated in its current form. Thanks.
Thank you for your question. So as of right now, there's definitely no plans to get rid of On the Map or take away any of those features. What we're working towards is adding some of the things that are working well from that, and possibly some of the data that's being fielded on the map, but that's not there right now. So definitely not in the works to get rid of that tool or anything like that. Definitely there to stay for now.
Thank you. Our next question is from Phyllis Cologne. Your line is open.
Hi. I was wondering, in my search for specific percentages of languages for languages spoken for limited English-speaking households for various Native American groups by tracts, if this new website is going to have a more contain more detailed information, because we have certain public involvement plans that we need to write to address certain environmental, environmental related notices. So we have to make sure that if we need a translator, we can see the predominant language on a very specific, I guess, track level. And I was just wondering if this new tool was going to be able to have more detailed.
That's definitely a great question. We would still be disseminating the same information that our data providers deliver to us. So the ACS would be delivering, I'm not sure if that level of detail is available. If it's something you're able to access in FactFinder now, then that would definitely be coming from the American Indian Alaska Native tables. If you're available to access it, we haven't migrated that particular data set to data.census.gov yet, but it will be coming soon, both for the 5-year period ending in 2016 as well as 2010. Excuse me, 2015 and 2010. So if you need help accessing that type of information, you can definitely contact us and we'll get you funneled over to the right folks. But if it's just a matter of something that the ACS doesn't produce, that would be a data product decision change that would have to come from the provider in order for us to put it in data.census.gov.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Our next question is from Etta Salong. Your line is open.
Yeah, hi. I had a quick question. Just navigating the news site. Typically, if I can't find something, I email. What's kind of the turnaround on sort of getting a response?
Thank you. So the feedback that you're seeing here says hi.feedback@census.gov. We do monitor that on a regular basis every day. It may take us a couple of days to research your question and get to the bottom of your answer. So as long as you give us around 3 business days, we'll be able to get back with you and get a response.
All right, thanks.
Our next question is from Ellen Grouse. Your line is open.
Hi, I had 2 questions. One was related to a previous question about saving preferences similar to your selections. So what the URL did was take you back to a query that you'd ran previously. Is there a way to save parameters for a search?
Yeah, if we could definitely research your question and get back with you if you want to email it to us.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
As a reminder, you may press *1 to enter the question queue. The next question is from Sabri Amara. Your line is open.
Yeah, I was wondering if there's a way to get richer data on individuals' information that's populated into the statistics. Or am I at the wrong site to learn more about that?
Can you expand on your question a little more?
Like household information, age, or languages spoken in a specific household?
Yeah, so there's definitely some data available on the site. It sounds like what you're referring to would be interest in possibly a cross-tabulation. That was one of the recommendations we made for using the advanced search. So choosing like topics under housing, you have lots of different, you can drill into more, and then once you make a selection, like if you wanted something at the household level, and then choosing additional crosses from there. For example, income happens to be something that's tabulated at the household level. Choosing combinations of things and then going down to view all your results.
Thank you. Our next question is from Stephen Banks. Your line is open.
Is there any thought of bringing HUD data like their low mod and other things that they derive from census information to data.census.gov?
As of now, no plans to get information outside of the Census Bureau, even if it's derived from our data into the platform, but we definitely welcome any suggestions in making data easier for you to access. So feedback we can take back, and also great example of things to send to our feedback box.
Thank you. Once again, if you would like to enter the question queue, you may do so by pressing star and then 1. Our next question is from Kayla Goldfarb. Your line is open.
Hi there. All of our questions have actually been answered. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question is from Edward Sussman. Your line is open.
Yeah, I noticed in one of your early slides you have data for the county business patterns. Are you planning on adding data for the zip business patterns?
Absolutely. We just haven't gotten there just yet, so they're something that we'll be onboarding in the future, but nothing concrete
thank you.
to give you right now.
Thank you. The next question is from David O'Brien. Your line is open.
I think my question was already answered. I was going to ask how I can still get access to the P12 tables and the 2000 census, and I believe the answer was that all that data is going to eventually be migrated over.
Yes, correct.
Thank you. The next question is from Christopher Brown. Your line is open.
Yes, it sounds like there's going to be a bit of awkwardness between the sunsetting of information going into AFF and information going into the data.census.gov. So I'm a bit concerned about how library users will be able to discern where to go to get what, other than using third-party sources like Social Explorer.
So just to make sure that we understand your question, for upcoming releases, again, everything's stopping with the population estimates release that's going to be happening in June. Everything forward will go seamlessly into data.census.gov instead of American Fact Finder. Right now, we're working towards migrating that data that's in American Fact Finder that hasn't quite made it into data.census.gov or the API, depending on what the data providers told us that they wanted the data to be transferred to. That work is in process. We're hoping to complete it by the end of the calendar year. And again, we are keeping AFF around a little bit longer, so you'll have about another year or so to access that historical data right now.
So there's no drop dead, is there a drop dead date for AFF? Like we can say for sure that it'll be gone by 2021?
We're looking at June 2020 as of now.
June 2020, okay. And, okay, thank you.
Thank you. The next question is from Lynn DuPont. Your line is open.
Hi. Will we still have access to an FTP site to allow us to download all the tables and sequences for an entire state in any geography?
Absolutely. The FTP sites are still up and running. We're actually working towards better linkages from our site to the FTP site, but as of now, you can continue to go to them just as you've been going before.
And Census 2020 data will be delivered that way?
I'm not sure the specifics for their delivery in terms of FTP. I do know that they intend to deliver on data.census.gov, but beyond that, we could definitely research your question and get back with you if you want to email it to us.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
Our next question is from Patty Baker. Your line is open.
Yes, I understand that you're going to be changing the whole geography selection, which is good because it's bad now. But I want to know why on earth you put urban-rural in there, because it makes it 3 times as long to try to page through the list. Doesn't make any sense to me.
So with that, we're pulling everything from the API, trying to make it accessible. We know that urban and rural in American Fact Finder was something that was really hidden in the geographies. We had a lot of calls at the Census Bureau and how to access anything on urban rural. So that was just our first attempt in trying to make those geographies more accessible to our users. Didn't quite hit the mark on that, but that's the beauty of this incremental development process and getting user feedback, so we can make things better going forward.
Okay. I hope it's going to be better because it's not good right now.
Our next question is from Winona Gretner. Your line is open.
Hi, my name is Winona Gardner. My Indian name is Wabananong Morningstar. I'm an enrolled member of the Stockbridge Muncie Band of Mohegan Nation of Fuller, Wisconsin. I reside in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I have family on the Tribal Council, and I work up as CEO of White Turtle Rainbow for Milwaukee. And over the years, there's been a lot of complaints about adequate representation of Native Americans in the census, and what they asked, what kind of initiatives are they doing to improve that?
That is a great question. I know there's a lot of focus on 2020 census, and we know it's important to make sure that we're getting an accurate count for communities. My expertise is in the data itself and disseminating of that, but if you want to email your question or give a call to PIO, the phone number is 301-763-3030. They'll be able to get you in contact with the folks that can answer that.
What is the email address?
It's here on the screen, and it's just PIO at census.gov for Public Information Office.
I can't access this through my iPhone. I'm on the phone.
Okay. So it's P-I-O.
I don't see any screen.
That's okay, but if you want to write down the email address, it's just PIO for Public Information Office at census.gov. So just email them and they'll be able to help you. Thank you. Operator. Oh.
Our next question is from Michelle Podgornick. Your line is open.
Yes, hi. If a search produces no results, how does a user know that there really are no results versus that they just need to rerun their search, like the issue you were having with Arizona health insurance? And then conversely, if a search produces results, can the user be confident that all of the pertinent results are being displayed?
Something that we're working on with user feedback. Given the high volume of folks hitting the site and following along, we're great to have such a large audience on the webinar and people interested and engaged. As a first instinct, I would try to refresh and get to the data again, but if that's still not getting you where you need to be, or even if you don't want to go through all of that, sending us screenshots is going to be the best way, and sending in feedback for the exact search you got to, or just copying and pasting that link from the top. That should help us be able to dig deeper into identifying if this was a system issue or if this is something where the data weren't available because the data is just not simply available due to something like population thresholds from the American Community Survey as an example. But definitely great questions and things we're working on and looking to improve.
Thank you. Our next question is from Marshawn Montgomery. Your line is open.
Hello, huge fan of the new update. Love the visuals. I wanted to ask about the different formats that we could download GIS data in. I know that previously we've had shapefiles, but I'm wondering if there's any consideration for GML or some of the open data formats.
We've received a lot of comments about wanting to have additional ways beyond just shapefiles to download data. I'm not familiar with the exact one you mentioned. I know something like GeoJSON was talked about in the past. Right now, we're focusing our efforts on making sure that we're ready for the upcoming major releases from 2018 ACS and 2017 Economic Census. So definitely being discussed and something that we hope to implement in the future, but it may be a little bit longer before we're able to get to a nice to have enhancement above and beyond the functionality that's required for that release.
Okay, thank you.
Definitely interested in working there. Thank you for that feedback.
Our next question is from Andrew Dietz. Your line is open.
Hi, thanks. Historic tiger lines with selected demographic and economic data were included in an update to census.gov. Will we be seeing future updates to that with the 2017 data?
So I do know you got a similar question. That's something that's kind of outside of the scope of data.census.gov, but just that I happen to be aware of. They're working towards getting those files ready. Last I checked, which was earlier this week, they weren't loaded on the website, but if you email your question in, I can make sure to get an update from the folks in the geography division that make those files and provide you with more detailed information than I have right now.
Okay, thank you very much.
Our next question is from Tim Sheehan with the Fresno Bee newspaper. Your line is open.
Hi, Tyson. Real quick question. I think you may have touched on it with the question a few moments ago about GIS formats, but I wanted to find out a couple of questions. One, the maps that you were showing when you were demonstrating the Arizona demonstration, are those maps downloadable in an interactive form, or is that yet to come?
That's a possible future enhancement that could come later, but as of now, they're not downloadable in an interactive way.
Okay. And the second question I had is, and this may be outside your scope, but what is the anticipated release date for the 2017 economic census data?
I don't have a specific date for that, but if you contact our public information office at pio@census.gov, they can definitely circle back with you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
As a reminder, you may press *1 to ask a question. Our next question is from Norman DeWeaver. Your line is open.
Thank you. Quick question on geography. Will Tiger remain as it is now, or is something going to happen to that?
No plans for any changes to Tiger. Those are things that you're accessing through census.gov that exist separately. Nothing in the works for that.
Thank you.
The next question is from Linda Alston. Your line is open.
Hi, I just wanted to know, I work with CLF data a lot. Will it be easier to get CLF data, or I should say MSA data, down to the state or the county level, and also by occupational CLF?
That's something that isn't going to change with data.census.gov. We'll continue to provide data as it's tabulated by the surveys and programs. So that would be a question and comment about a data product that would have to be taken back to the folks that make the tables.
Okay. Thank you.
The next question is from Mark Colmaine. Your line is open.
Hi, I have a couple of questions. Will the table IDs change? I heard you mention population estimates, and is it safe to assume that population estimates will get migrated to data.census.gov? Will the LEHD data remain on its own site, or will that get migrated to data.census.gov? And currently on FactFinder, we are able to download Excel files under the View the Data selection that is in a somewhat more user-friendly spreadsheet format than the CSV files. And I noticed on data.census.gov that only the CSV files are able to be downloaded, so I'm curious if those Excel spreadsheets will be available on data.census.gov. Sorry for so many questions. Thank you very much for your time and your presentation.
Thank you for your questions. I have first thing, table IDs, no plans to change that. If for some reason the data providers wanted to change table IDs, we would pull the data as they give it to us, but there's no change associated with transitioning from AFS to data.census.gov in regards to table IDs changing. Population estimates, that is something that would be in scope to be migrated in the future after the releases in June. And then for LEHD data, that's something that's continuing to exist on their own separate websites. We hope to onboard additional surveys and programs, but as of right now, no plans actively with them to do anything there. Definitely no plans to get rid of any of their tools that you are able to access data on now. And then for downloads, we also get lots of feedback from users about kind of wanting a more friendly look. So for your Excel question, we have a lot of feedback. We hope to be able to work towards that feedback, but it's probably something that you wouldn't be seeing before these major data releases, as we're working on things that are required to get the data as a first priority.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.